Hi, I'm Karen, and I will be presenting on autism in the workplace. So that brings us to the first slide, which is the demographic. And why I chose this is because I think it needs a lot of attention. So I'm in Arizona, and research shows that out of all the disabilities, people with autism are less likely to be employed or pursue a secondary education. Um, Now, there could be various reasons as to why this is. Autism is on the rise by 30% since 2008, but we aren't sure if it is because doctors are more informed um, and they are detecting it quicker, or if it's actually going up. So, needless to say, we have some data on autism, but not enough. As of today, we are not sure of the causes, nor is there a cure. So when we talk about employers, they might not know what to do with a person with autism in their company or business, but because of the lack of information. But it's extremely important to practice inclusion with everyone. So this brings us to the next slide, which is inclusion. So I mentioned before, there's still a lot to learn about autism. Therefore, inclusion can be harder for people with autism. So inclusion means to have a sense of belonging, and it's hard to feel included in many places if you feel like an outsider, if nobody understands you. One of the main characteristics of autism that I'll mention a lot throughout this presentation because it's very important is the lack of social skills that people with autism face. Somehow, autism disorder affects their social interaction. So, imagine someone typical going on a job interview. It can be very nerve-wracking. So, for someone with autism, it might be 10 times harder to answer interview questions or read body language of the person interviewing. So this brings us to the next slide, which is social mobility. Social mobility is how we can climb the social ladder. This is based on opportunities people have in life, and there are characteristics that statistically make you not eligible to climb that ladder. So for example, your income level or where you come from, the color of your skin. So if you come from a low-income family or neighborhood, that probably means that, your public education system wasn't the best, which means you didn't have access to tutors or things like that. So that might mean your grades aren't that great, and then that affects you getting into college or even trying to pursue college. So it's like a domino effect. So people with autism are automatically born with a disadvantage, just like someone who's born in poverty. Now imagine having autism and being poor, and not having a good public education. This doubles the chances of you ever moving up. But luckily today, we have many people that have fought for the rights of people with disabilities. So for people with autism in the workplace, we have what is now Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. So this act was supposed to be the solution to discrimination towards people with disabilities in the workplace. But according to some research, this might have created a bigger problem because when this came to place, it meant that employers would have to give all the supports they needed to people with disabilities. So the Department of Disability was getting a lot of complaints that their employer wasn't giving them enough support, which created problems for that employer. So then they just the hiring went down. Actually, it went up at first when this first passed because they couldn't discriminate, but then it went down because it just became harder. There are also loopholes to ADA. Employers can make the hiring process harder for people with disabilities. There's also another law that is still in place today that gives companies permission to pay their employees with disabilities less than the minimum wage. And the minimum wage in the United States as of today is $7.25. So that they can pay them less than that. But there are many tools to help people with disabilities. So let's talk about assistive technology. Assistive technology are tools that are going to support a person with disability. For example, people with autism, they have trouble communicating. So one of the main tools that is used by people with autism are communication devices, because some people with autism are completely nonverbal, or the rest most likely have some kind of speech impediment. There are applications that one can download to a phone, a tablet, or an iPad that will talk for you at the touch of a button. The thing about these is that they're very pricey, and it's not a one-size-fits-all. A speech pathologist has to evaluate the person with autism to see what device will they benefit from the most. There are also, like I said, it's not a one-size-fits-all, so there's many options. There's the application that's a pretty high-tech option, but then there's also a low-tech, which is like a static board. So the person just points to words on a board, and then the person they're communicating with has to look and see what they pointed at. So those are some of the assistive technology options for people with autism, and that is the one they use the most. Our next slide is about behavior plans for people with autism. So in order, since autism is a spectrum, it has a very wide range of symptoms and severity, so the behaviors are different, but there is something called a BIP, a behavior intervention plan, that is created for people with autism that can help them while they're in school and even after. So what this does is the plan indicates exactly what triggers certain behaviors and what helps them to calm down. So it has different strategies to deal with behaviors for the people that are working with people with autism. They do use a lot of reinforcers, but that is with people on the lower end. And that is because most reinforcers are like candy or small things like that, which are things that like kids will work for, not usually adults. Adults in the workplace literally work for their paycheck, so that is going to be the reinforcer for them. And typically, a person with autism, to have a job, has to be on the higher end of the spectrum. They have to meet, certain communication skills and stuff like that. But the good thing is that, when our next slide is about collaboration, and the good thing is that there's always a team behind someone with a disability, because when someone has a disability, it's almost impossible to act alone. So for people with autism in the workplace, there are many groups that help fight for equal rights and to pass laws and legislations, like I talked about before in the policy slide. ARC is one of the biggest organizations that fights for equal rights, and how this community gets issues resolved is by getting the attention of government, because we need to pass laws for this, just like they did for no discrimination when applying for a job and things like that. So that's the way they have to go in the autism community. Thank you. That is the end of my slide.